Welcome to Jesus-Centric Leadership. I'm Donna, and we are continuing our talk with Betsy Bowers. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me back.
And of course, Pastor Josh again.
Sorry.
We want to do part 2 of kind of special broadcast of talking about where families are at, where students, where children are at. And I just don't think we can do this without talking about this big package of anxiety. Now, anxiety has become more of a socially accepted word post-pandemic, right?
Absolutely.
And it means so much. Can you talk a little bit, maybe unpack the definition as you see it of what true anxiety is and what the world's calling it?
That's a really good way to ask that. I think that there's a way, I'm going to try not to be too clinical here because I write a lot of notes and stuff, so that can come out in the way I talk at times. But anxiety in its truest sense, I think, is having emotional distress that does not match the situation that's causing it. And,
Wait, say that again.
Okay, emotional distress that does not match the situation or stressor that's causing it.
Oh.
Can you give an example, quick?
So, taking a spelling test, the little one thinking in their mind that, oh, well, it doesn't matter, I'm going to get yelled at. And it's not necessarily just a spelling test anymore. It's something that represents, yes,
a million other things.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
My significance, my worth, my parents, the way they see me. Wow.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, you said there's 2 parts to it.
Right. And I would say the second part of anxiety is kind of a more, like you alluded to this, the colloquially.
I like that word.
Yeah,
Well said.
I wanted to say it. I like that word. It really had to be there. It's shared by the public to explain something that is a little bit nebulous, something that is kind of a little bit difficult to describe. And so it's very uncomfortable, and so it's anxiety.
So what do you think, Betsy, is fueling this anxiety?
I think that it could be a lot of different factors. It depends on what's going on in each person's life, of course. But I think that part of it, at least I would say, most of it, honestly, comes from this desire to know what's going to happen. And it's like the brain shortcuts to give a prediction that's negative in order to prepare the person for the worst possible outcome.
Ooh, that's a rough way to live.
Heavy, right?
But I think so many of us do that. Like, I take my kids skiing and I have to remind myself not to jump to, well, they could fall off the chairlift and get hurt, right? Like,
that could happen. Yeah.
But it doesn't make skiing as fun as it could be because I'm worrying about their safety.
And it takes you away from the presence and enjoyment of that time. And it's hard not to live like that because our brains are designed to help us survive. And so survive, narrow down the things that could hurt you. Maybe it's more likely that you survive. Like, it kind of makes sense, but it doesn't work very well in terms of enjoyment or presence.
So you go to your kids in your current parenting. I'm looking at that going, oh, did my generation cause this problem? Because the way we parented was don't touch the fireplace. If you touch the fireplace, you're going to burn yourself. Then you're going to get great big blisters. And then did we kind of lay the foundation a little bit of this, do you think?
I think so. My mom and dad have always kind of talked about how kids were seen and not heard. And that's the way they grew up.
That's how we were parented,
yes,
right?
Exactly. And they did not work with us like that. There was maybe at times over communication.
Right.
And I'm going to give you all this information so you know why it's important for you to do what I'm saying. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. It comes from a good place in your heart to protect and to teach. But there's going to be a downside, I think, to whatever parenting method there is. Just so
Right.
you know, we
That
can't do it
pendulum
perfect.
swings.
Exactly. As humans, we're going to react to what we have dealt with, and it's important for us to know what that looks like in our behavior.
Good. So we have this thing where people are worried about the future and they're creating all these scenarios. And again, is it just our thoughts that are fueling it? Is it...
Oh, there's a lot more to that. I think that part of it depends on exposure to certain things. Honestly, how much screen time there is plays a factor.
It goes back to screen time again.
It does, because there's so much that we can access in such a tiny little box. And it's like the world could be represented in that tiny little box. But if you think about how dangerous that can be for someone that's 8, 9 years old, to be able to explore all of that, be exposed to that, have all that stimulation, their system's not going to be able to process that like someone that, like my parents, I didn't get a cell phone that was mine until I was 20. Otherwise, they shared it with my sister, and it was not a smartphone. And honestly, those were really peaceful times.
Yeah.
Like, there's a part of me that looks back and it was like, wow.
Yeah, I've talked to some students who have actually crossed boundaries, and parents have taken away their smartphone and given them flip phones. And the words I hear from students are, I liked that. I want my smartphone back.
It's simpler.
Because I'm being left out. But yes, it's very much simpler.
And the simplicity of it doesn't always lead to peace, but it can. Just because you're not getting that inundation of all that information, of all the people that you want to keep up with. I mean, you get, kind of going back to the last podcast where we talked about distraction for a moment, you can get so distracted with what you think other people expect you to be doing, and that fuels anxiety as well.
It's the FOMO.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, I've seen kids as young as preschool with tablets and no boundaries on it. They can go anywhere, and they're navigating these things. Is that shocking to you?
Absolutely. I honestly, I have to say it with compassion, because I don't have kids, and I can only imagine what it's like. There are times where my dogs are being crazy and I just give them something to keep them occupied. So I can see the mentality there, and there's grace and understanding for that. It's when that becomes the go-to. To whenever there's like a little bit of disruption or a little bit of a lapse in time, you miss out on an opportunity of being with, of teaching, of really experiencing something fun with your kid potentially. Because that's what I really love about families. Kids are there to really kind of be a sense of chaos in some sense, but they teach us and they remind us why life is worth living. And parents are there to provide a sense of order, which is not always fun, but it has to be done. We have to teach them. And for us to teach kids how to live in this world. And how to do life. So it's like everybody's there to do that for each other. And if it's working together well, it can be a really amazing journey. Not perfect by any means.
Right.
Not without its faults, not without mistakes, but it can still be, it's sanctifying, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and when we fill it with distractions, we can really miss those moments. My dog will actually paw at my hand when I'm on my phone.
Oh my gosh.
And that's a big indicator that I'm spending too much time on my phone. And just imagine if that's an animal, what our families are wanting, you know, and to just put it down and be present. Mm-hmm. And that takes down that anxiety.
Yeah, and I try to encourage my kids to do that, like, you know, tell daddy when he's on his phone too much, because, like, I need that reminder. And they're good at noticing that. Daddy, pay attention to me. That's, like, good. And we want to, I think, but it's easy as a parent to say, like justify it. Like, so I think it's easy for me to say, well Caleb, I'm sorry, I gotta send this text because it's for work. And like, and maybe I do, but like, if I kind of snap at him or if I get frustrated, like, I'm going to take away his desire to do that again. Right. And so that's something I want to nurture and encourage, like, have them ask me to get off my cell phone.
Absolutely.
That's a good thing, right?
And that's where if you create that open dialogue, that's going to be something that follows them throughout life. And then when they have their own families, they're going to be doing that open communication and that vulnerability where it's like, hey, and this is what everybody needs in partnerships and families and marriages is someone you can be with and you can kind of call them out on what they need to be called out on that is distracting them and taking their eyes off God. Like, you need that in order to be the best person that you can possibly be.
Yeah. What a great way to look at it.
Yeah, it seems like it's not a lack of, like, we're never going to create the perfect family. We're never going to have a lack of messiness, but can we have a place where there's great communication and great understanding and great authenticity of who we are as a family?
Yeah.
And limited distractions.
And
Right.
Okay, so I feel like we could do a whole podcast on just technology itself and all.
Maybe.
But what else do you see as fueling anxiety today?
I think there are definitely, and I don't want to go too much into like social issues, but economic problems right now, are a big deal. And I think that especially I don't know what it must be like for people in there. Well, I kind of know because I see them as clients, but experientially, I don't know what it's like to be a 20-something getting out of college, trying to get a job right now and trying to live off of that job. Yes. It's so hard to be able to do that. And those constraints are real. And so it's kind of like with anxiety, you have to navigate the balance between what is the real pressure, what is the concrete possibility of what honestly could happen, and what is the real situation that I need to attend to in front of me. How can I do the most good? Yeah. Because if we're trying to avoid whatever is the worst possible outcome, we're not necessarily going to be focused on how can I do the most good. Yeah. Because avoidance doesn't necessarily translate into presence.
I was just reading that this generation is the first one, the 20-something, younger 20-something, that will not realize the things that their parents did in their generation. Like, it's going to be harder, and some of those things they won't get the same opportunities because of the direction things are going. Yeah. Yeah,
and it's almost like in the midst of that, like, I think we can worry, because I think they thought that about millennials too, and it's interesting, my generation, it's interesting to, like, some of us have done better than our parents, but it's almost like in the midst of that, like, Jesus comes back and he says, right, like, don't worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow has enough problems of its own, right? And that really, it sounds like with what you're saying about anxiety, that's really, like, the best advice that you could possibly have about anxiety. It's don't go to the what ifs. Ask the question, what can I do today?
Yes. And having trust in that provision. Because honestly, if you look at the track record of your life, if you're in your 20s, you've made it. You've not made it perfectly, but God has provided a way. And if he has provided a way those other days and those other instances where you didn't feel capable of showing up, but he did, then that's what you need. That's what you need to walk forward confidently.
And not only in your 20s, in your 30s,
absolutely.
40s, 50s,
yes.
60s, 70s.
Oh, yes. When you get out of bed in the morning. Absolutely.
Yeah, because we can look back and see God's faithfulness and see how he's brought us through so much.
Truly.
Yeah, and a lot of times I think our mind jump to, well, but this is different. I've never been through this before, right? But it's back to God's provision. The thing that's constant is that Jesus is on the throne and he's in charge of your life.
Absolutely. And I think that with that, we see a different quality in our relationship with God when we look at our life with that kind of perspective of his presence, even in times where we were super uncomfortable and we were super distressed. He was able to be with us and bring us through and see the bigger picture than we can. And that's the truth about who he is he sees beyond whatever we're feeling. And so how much more do we need to lean into him?
And you hit on a key word there. It was so much more than what we're feeling, because our feelings will lie to us.
Absolutely. They do not tell us the truth.
No, I wish they did sometimes.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, because I'm a very feeling person, but yeah, that cannot be my guide. God is that consistent. He Yeah.
One of the most powerful phrases in my healing has been feelings do not equal facts. And
That's really good.
I can go back to scripture and know that's facts.
Yeah, because Jesus talks about, or the Bible talks about that we know it and then we tell ourselves what's true versus I feel it inside and then it goes to my head. Like, I think that's a lot of times how the world wants to work. And Jesus says, no, it's that I'm going to give you the knowledge and then you're going to tell yourself how to feel, which is easy to say and hard to do.
Absolutely. But at the same time, it's like that parent giving a child order. I mean, we need that so much, and we need that to be laid out for us to simplify what our view of the world is and where we're headed. It really, I mean, as much as it's difficult to follow the way, the truth, and the life, and it is a narrow path, it does make things more peaceful. He does provide a way for us to lean in and continue to, whether he's carrying us or we're leaning on him, he brings us through. And you can know that by just looking back on instances of your life where you were like truly bereft and truly without what you thought you needed to get through. But he brought you to the next day and beyond.
And to give thanks for that.
Absolutely,
like in the
gratitude,
times
yes.
where we don't know what to do, we can get lost in that anxiety and that fear. It's to give thanks.
And yes, that is the antidote in so many ways, is being able to, and there are studies that show either beginning of your day or the end of your day, 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for. If you jot those things down, it is going to bring your life satisfaction up.
Yeah, and Voskamp did a whole book about that, right?
1,000
and
gifts.
I think, 1,000 gifts. And a good friend of mine gave that to me when I was going through a particularly difficult time. And I was like, I don't want to give thanks right now. But in reading that book, it stopped me and it helped me just one thing. And then I put it 2 things a day, and then I kept just adding another thing. But it really does put your heart and your mind where it needs to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the Bible says give thanks in all circumstances,
all
right?
Circumstances.
Yeah, all circumstances, yeah.
Right.
And I think that kind of brings up an interesting piece about the difference. This is something that we talk about in anxiety, triggers. And the opposite of a trigger is something that's going to bring up your emotional distress or take you back to a state where you were in a bad way in some shape or form. But the opposite of that is a glimmer. A glimmer is a moment, and I like to kind of think about it as a moment of transcendence, where truly you can see God providing. You can truly see him stepping into your life and being like, hello. And that is a different way of viewing the world rather than, okay, well, I had this trigger hit me today and this trigger hit me today.
Yeah, even when you said the word trigger just then, when you brought up triggers, I was like, oh no, here we go, right?
Yeah.
And then when you said glimmer, that gives you some hope. Yeah. And one seems to take that away like, oh, we're going to unpack all of these things and that maybe don't need to be unpacked. But glimmer keeps you looking at the hope that we have in God.
And it's not that you have to completely wash away what the use of triggers could be, because if you have that knowledge, then you can kind of construct a plan around how to work with those. Right. But it's kind of, in a way, a glimmer can be the antidote, can be the solution, and I think that's what Jesus is for us. And so it kind of makes sense in a paradoxical way that our view would be lifted higher if we were attending to the proper things.
Yeah. And to look intentionally.
Exactly.
Like Blackaby says, we see God because we look for God.
Yes.
We have to see those glimmers by looking for those glimmers.
Absolutely.
They're not going to be just handed to us. And that does change the mindset.
Well, yeah, and hope is foundational for people doing anything good, right? Mm-hmm. We don't do anything good if we don't have hope. And a glimmer sounds like it is part of where hope comes from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's something that lifts our gaze to a greater place than where we currently are, which is what we need so much to expand our lives and to feel like it has meaning and even greater than feeling like it has meaning, to truly be aligned with our purpose and living to our highest possibility to be that creation that God's made us to be.
And can shift this whole huge momentum of living in anxiety to living in the peace that passes all understanding.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, well said.
Where do you think the future? So here we talk about don't look at the future, and then I'm going to ask a question, right?
Yeah.
But are we on the downhill side of this of anxiety driving so much? Do we still have a little bit of ways to go before we're going to be on the downhill side?
I think it's difficult to ascertain a direction there, just because my view as a clinician is going to be different than other people that look at social patterns. But I think that what I find in my work with various individuals is that hope wins out and peace transcends understanding, and we have that promise. And even though the rates of anxiety may fluctuate, may go up, it's not that he isn't above that and that we're not going to have solutions, new developments. One thing that's just kind of fueling my practice right now that's so interesting is doing EMDR training. And just seeing how God has made the brain to really be so adaptive in the way it can process through things in a natural way. And it's miraculous. And despite all the trauma that people can go through and all of the different things that can limit them, there is a way through.
Just real quick, for our listeners, define it.
EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It is a long way to say your eyes move around kind of like when you're asleep. And so it's consolidating memory and helping learning. It accelerates it faster.
In my understanding, it came out of the bombings in Oklahoma, correct? They were working with those victims.
Yes.
And or survivors.
Yes.
And they wanted to give them a way to remember it that was safe and positive. So it kind of has been developed since then.
Right, and it's based around the work of Francine Shapiro, and she also did a lot of work with sexual assault survivors and veterans, and there's a lot of good research out on this.
Fantastic. Wow, it was great to talk with you, and I have a feeling we have future podcasts coming from you, so we'll definitely would love to invite you back.
Sounds great. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.